We'll get that going. So good evening, everyone. As we get started here, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Hannah. I'm the Assistant Director at the Blue Hill Library. I just wanted to give a quick welcome to everyone and thank you all for coming out tonight. We're so excited to be part of Gretchen Cherington's book launch for her new memoir, Poetic License, in partnership with Blue Hill Books. And I want to make sure to plug Blue Hill Books and say, if you need a book, if you need a copy of Gretchen's book, please buy it from Samantha. The store is open. You can go inside, you can pick up your books on the porch, or they will ship it to you. Do you have anything to add, Sam?
No, we're so happy to be here. I'm so excited to see Gretchen's book come to fruition, having been part of the process throughout it, the publication. And so I'm just so excited to be here for the launch of this book. It's a celebration.
Yeah. Gretchen, as you will hear, grew up in a household populated by many revered poets and writers of the 20th century. And now she has written her own story in this memoir. She's also written many essays that have been published in lots of different publications, and is a big community leader and serves on many boards. And she splits her time between New Hampshire and our own Brooksville, Maine. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Gretchen, and let you get this party started.
Okay, we'll do so. Well, first of all, just thank you so much for coming and joining us, really from all over the country, and at least one from Canada, or a couple from Canada. I want to give a real strong thanks to Samantha as owner of Blue Hill Books. And as she mentioned, she ended up being, I asked her to be one of my beta readers for the book, as it was about maybe a year and a half before publication, and I was trying to get the final manuscript done, and I had 5 or 6 people help me with that at that time, and Samantha was one of them, and her advice and her feedback was really wonderful to get. Also, just thank you to Blue Hill Blue Hill Library. It's a wonderful library in Blue Hill, Maine, just terrific, with great events in the summer and probably all year round as well. So I'm a proud seasonal resident of Brooksville, Maine, which is about 25 minutes maybe from Blue Hill, and have been going there pretty much every summer of my 69 years. So it's really kind of my heart home up there. And I'm just so sorry that we can't all be there in Blue Hill, but on the other hand, this allows us to have people from other places too. So again, thanks for everybody for coming. I was asked to just maybe tell you just a little bit about the book, particularly if you haven't read it yet, and then to do a couple of quick readings, and then we'll open it up to questions. So Poetic License traces the arc of my relationship with my father, the poet Richard Eberhardt. It is grounded in the 1990s when I was in my 40s, and I was spending quite a lot of time researching in my father's extensive literary archives, which are held at Dartmouth College, nearby where we live in New Hampshire. And I was facing kind of an existential crisis in a way, in the sense that I had been growing up around lots of stories and family myths about my dad and our family in general. And some of them really didn't square with my own lived experience. And that crisis was beginning to really be tough on me personally. At the same time, I was building a career in consulting, advising CEOs of companies on kind of facing the truth of their companies and themselves. So interestingly, while I was working with this other sort of powerful men in their corner suites in companies all over the world, I was also grappling with how do I accept the truth about my beloved father and my family in general. And so although the book is more focused on the relationship between my father and me, there are a few episodes of my kind of work career that help exemplify, hopefully, this kind of parallel track that I was on. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of the book if you haven't already read it. And as everybody's already said, please buy it from Blue Hill Books if you haven't. So I'll start with I have to start with a main scene. It doesn't seem appropriate not to. So I'm going to start with a short scene. I'll set it up by saying that I guess being in Maine as a little kid was like nirvana. It was really an amazing place to be. This was in the 1950s, say late 50s. I was probably say from when I was sort of 3 to 7-ish. That's when this takes place. And we had a very kind of strict daily routine. The routine was that my father lit a fire in the fireplace in the morning because the cold air had seeped through the walls. And he took his breakfast standing up very quickly standing up at the sort of tacky counter in the kitchen. Cold coffee was fine. Orange juice swigged out of the carton was fine. While my mom sat in the living room, her back to him, totally engrossed in whatever book she was reading. And she'd already had a couple of cups of coffee, and he would eat 1 or 2 pieces of toast. She'd eat 6 or 8 and could extend those toast pieces through several hours of reading. My father did his work from about 8 to 11. So what he called his money work took place in the back shed, essentially, which sort of turned into his writing place. And I waltzed between the two, just trying to get somebody to pay a little attention to me, and particularly hung out with my dad in those mornings because I knew that at 11 o'clock he was likely to go to the Harborside post office, which was tiny, in a woman's house, and then stop at Lib Leach's store. And that was what I most wanted to do, was to go to Lib's store. So this takes place in Lib's store. It gives you a little bit of a flavor of what life was like on Cape Rozier back in the late 50s. Lib's tiny store took up the front room of her small farmhouse, a house set back only 8 feet from the road. Dark and dank, it had sagging floors that made my eyes wobble, but it was the closest place to buy groceries, unless we drove to Condon's or Eddie Nestle's in South Brooksville. Dust blanketed Lib's canned goods, but her eggs came fresh from the hen house behind her store, and sometimes she'd have fresh peas or green beans from her garden. Dad picked up a few eggs and placed them on her counter. "What else did Mom want?" he asked me, having not listened the way I had. "Deviled ham and tomato soup," she said, 3 of each. Mom figured Lib's canned goods were safe enough, dust and all, and you never knew who might stop by for dinner, but someone always did. "And bread for the seagulls," I added. Dad picked up a loaf of Wonder Bread, which was good enough for the gulls we liked to feed while he steered his boat Rev around in circles out behind Spectacle Island. Lib was rail thin, her face the color of a warm hen's egg, her skin hardened by outdoor labor and long winters. Behind the thick wooden counter, arms folded across her chest, adorned in her cotton dress and apron, she held her ground, as still as a tree. Mom called her a tough beauty, while Dad considered her slim frame regal. Her sharp facial fixtures were stern yet warm. When I was older, I'd liken Lib to the rock-bound coast of Maine itself, sturdy, resolute, and not going anywhere. "We're having a reading at the Robinsons' farmhouse tonight. Perhaps you'll come," Dad said. Lib nodded. "There's a storm coming," Lib offered. "A sou'wester, they say." "When will she be here?" Dad nodded at Lib. "Don't suppose I know, but trust we'll find out in time." I was starting to think that Dad had forgotten me, which wasn't unusual since he frequently misplaced things, including his children. Just then, he told me to reach in his pocket. I pulled out pennies and stepped on my tippy toes to fetch candy from Lib's glass jars, a root beer barrel, a fireball, a piece of bubble gum with comics, a Mary Jane, and 2 Tootsie Rolls, one for me and one for my best summer friend, Sarah, who spent every August in a cottage on our cove too. Each year, the outdoor chairs at Undercliff filled with writers and artists, local people who took care of the cottage and our boats, and summer families who ringed the cove. Graham had her own cottage down the road. Mom and Dad doled out invitations to friends, most of whom said yes, coming from as far as San Francisco and Florida, or as near as New Hampshire and Vermont. We were out on the water by 1 p.m. and back for cocktails at 6 p.m. sharp. We bought our vegetables from Scott and Helen Nearing over on the backside of the Cape. Later, from Elliot and Sue Coleman. Milk and fish were delivered to our door. We picked up lobsters from Paul Benno, and dug for clams and mussels on the beach at low tide. Mom and I fished from the rowboat for mackerel when they were running in the cove. Undercliff was a child's idol. I roamed the fields, forests, and beaches with no barriers, no fences or signs between one lot of land and another. I hardened my bare feet on the rocky beach, caught fireflies in the meadow at dusk, sailed my tiny sailboat Aussie, and read books in the hammock under the spruce trees. I loved the forest behind the house, which shot up the cliff with its rich aroma of balsam needles for pillows and its carpet of thick moss. When Sarah and I met up after libs, we could spend hours in that forest, perched on the rocky precipice high above the cove. With our Barbie dolls laid out on moss-covered rocks, we stretched their little plastic shoes over their feet while keeping an eye on the cottages, the beach, and the boats below. Dad's annual poetry festival at the Robinsons' farmhouse up the lane might include Mary McCarthy, Robert Lowell, and Philip Booth from Castine, Dan Hoffman from around the Cape, E.B. White from Brooklyn. Whatever writers or artists were within an hour of us were invited. In later years, Donald Hall and Walker Evans, Buckminster Fuller, Maxine Kumin would be at those summer readings. That evening, I strung my short legs through the balusters of the Robinson stair railing and listened to the poets string together words like pearls, offered up as testimony to a summer day. The sound was intoxicating, like the gentle rocking of Rev on her mooring. Soon, I got drowsy and slid down the stairs on my bottom to sidle up next to Dad, drifting into poetic dreams while he read the lines I loved. The seals at play off Western Isle in the loose flowing of the summer tide. After it was over, he carried me in his arms down the tiny path to Undercliff, jostling me awake a few times as he stumbled on a rock while chatting with Mom, who held a flashlight to illuminate our way. Upstairs, under the steep eaves, Dad laid me down on my bed and flashed his signature Eskimo kiss. His signature eyelash kiss, Eskimo style, across my cheek. As he settled me back to sleep, his wide hands soothing my back, I took for granted I was safe. I expected the idyll would last. I assumed I could trust my father for as long as I lived. The second reading brings me to adulthood, and it takes place in 1995 when I had been spending, as I mentioned before to you, some years in my father's archives at Dartmouth. And I'd probably been there then for maybe 3 years or something like that. I would try to go every Monday morning. And of course I didn't make every Monday morning. I was raising kids and running my consulting company too. But I was really pulled to his archives, and I got the chance because they weren't cataloged yet and were being stored in an offsite facility while Dartmouth was building its new special collections library. I had free reign over 175 boxes of my father's letters, over 55,000 of them, in fact, which was a little daunting and overwhelming, and I definitely did not get through them all, in case you're wondering. But I did get through quite a few of them, and I found them really fascinating. What I was told a couple things by Philip Cronenwet, who was then the librarian at the Dartmouth, at the Special Collections Library, and Phil said that there were two things of interest about my father's archives, or really one thing, and the other thing was interesting about Dartmouth. Dartmouth has about the most accessible special collections library of any college in this country. And so you could now, if you wanted to, go find any of the letters that I read online now, instead of pouring through the old paper as I did. And the thing about my dad's archive is that whereas most writers save all the letters that are sent to them from other writers, my father also saved the carbon copies of his letters. And so we could, there's this amazing epistolary conversation between poets and writers of the 20th century, all housed within those letters. And some of them were really fascinating, particularly some of I sort of focused mostly on the poets that I knew growing up the best, and the ones that I either liked or I didn't like. So this is in 1995, and I one day, it was a beautiful day, I'd been working in the library for a few hours, and it was one of those gorgeous New England fall days when everything is red and yellow and orange, and the sky is blue, and if it weren't COVID time, millions of people are coming through to look at the foliage. And I had told my father about writing about him, but at that time, I just something told me I should have another conversation with him. I had no idea what I was going to say or ask, but I just felt compelled to talk to him again about it. So I'm visiting him in his retirement home across town. "To what do I owe the pleasure of your visit?" Dad asked. Seated in his green wingback chair, he pointed for me to take a seat next to him. He leaned toward me, a lean I'd seen many times when he tipped his weight and attention towards a writer and got pulled into literary conversation. I turned away from him and looked out the window at the fading afternoon sun. "I'm trying to figure things out, Dad," I said, my mouth dry. "I'm trying to figure you out. So I'm writing about you." His wide eyes encouraged me. "I'd like to read you a piece." I'd never shared anything I'd written with him, and not even as a kid. He just had never seemed interested. That day, he looked riveted, which shouldn't have surprised me, since he always was his own favorite subject. "Speak slowly, Gretch. I want to hear you," Dad said, propping his hands on his knees to listen while leaning closer to me. I'd written a piece about his childhood years in Austin, Minnesota, an innocent enough place to start. I read slowly, enunciating and emphasizing words, emulating his reading style as best I could. What's it like to have me write about you?" I asked after finishing. "Why, marvelous." "I'll never get through all the boxes, Dad. You kept so much." My father smiled, unabashed at being called out as the pack rat of our family. "Will I find any surprises?" I asked. Dad paused for several seconds. "Well, if you do, won't that be interesting?" He raised his bushy eyebrows a friend of his had once called ferocious because his thick tufts went every which way. As a teenager, his raised eyebrows seemed flirtatious to me. "When you look back at your long life, Dad, do you have any regrets?" My father took his time considering my question. Time enough, I thought, to scan 9 decades. Time enough for me to scan a line of white birch trees outside his room, their yellow leaves fluttering in the breeze. I thought of Frost's poem about birches, and of Frost himself sitting in the green leather chair in our living room in Hanover with his thick thatch of white hair. A chickadee hopped from branch to branch, creating quite a poem itself. "No," he said finally. "Really?" I thought. I had so many regrets. "Is there anything you don't want me to say?" I asked. "No," my father said. "Your only job as a writer is to tell the truth." So I hope those 2 readings just gave you a little sense of kind of the early days, in particularly summertime in Maine, and also kind of the feeling of lots of writers around the house all the time. It was pretty rare for me to have dinner with my parents on my own, practically never. They really liked a big swirl of people around them. So I'll stop there, Hannah and Sam, and you can orchestrate from here.
Yeah. Yeah. Sam, did you have specific questions you wanted to start with, or should we just open it up?
Yeah, I mean, I have some questions about, we had hoped that Brooke Warner from She Writes Press would be able to join us today, and I'm sad that she wasn't able to, because I know that you guys had a great working relationship in that process. But I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the process of publishing a book as a first-time author, and especially, with a subject that's so intimate and involves a lot of process of sort of going back and reliving conversations and events with family, and just what that process was like for you as an individual. And sort of my follow-up question to that is, later in the book, you have some beautiful chapters about deepening this relationship to your body through yoga and through cycling. And so just, it seems like, sort of that physical process was really helpful for you in kind of processing some of this as well. So I don't know if that is not like a solid question in that, but I would just—
That was like 25 questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So any of those
I'll try to.
I think that those are interesting.
Yeah.
Pieces.
Okay. No, I'll and tell me if I'm not answering them right, all of them. First of all, Brooke is sorry not to be here. She's kind of chasing fires in California, meaning she and her son are trying to get out of one particular area into another particular area. And so it's just not possible for her to be with us tonight. But I'm happy to talk about She Writes Press and my relationship with her and how that all worked. I guess I would start by saying that this is a book that took a long time to write. There are a couple of people here with us tonight, at least I saw one, Marge Matthews from Hanover, who was in my writing group for quite a while. And, she's probably saw, I don't know how many versions, but quite a few. I started writing it in the 90s, as I said, really just kind of jotting down memories. I went to these workshops run by a woman here named Joni Cole, and learned how to create scenes, create dialogue. And frankly, in the early stages, was trying just to unlearn my business writing, because I was steeped in business reports and slide decks and all that kind of stuff. And I really had never taken creative writing. I didn't know much about I mean, I knew about it because my dad taught it and everything, but I didn't take it myself. So the first stage was really unlearning business writing, trying to free myself up as a creative writer, and just trying to get memories down, as fast as I could. And I would say maybe if the book took 20 years, which is pretty correct, that was probably the first 10 years of it or so, taking lots of workshops, etc. I went through a stage I think it was in the 2000s, when I had an agent, and then I had another agent, and neither of them was able to sell the book as it was in that form back then. And frankly, now that I know what goes into a book, I'm glad it wasn't published, because it would have been pretty bad. And so fast forward to, frankly, learning about She Writes Press from Blue Hill Books, because I picked up a wonderful, tough but wonderful memoir by Elizabeth Garber, who's a Maine poet and author of a memoir, lives in Belfast, Maine. And she was reading, I looked at the book, I picked it up, I read it, I found out that she was actually reading, a couple days later. And so I spoke with her about it afterwards, because I'd seen only one other She Writes book and didn't know much about the press. And when we talked at length on the phone following her reading, she said, you've got to get in touch with Brooke Warner. So I did. And I will say that my work with Brooke and She Writes Press in general, but particularly Brooke, was intense and kind of exhausting at times. I had rewritten the book, I don't know how many times. Well, I had to rewrite it all over again. I had sort of found a new voice, and so I had to change everything to get it into that voice. And Brooke is a passionate supporter of memoirs. That's really, she publishes everything, but memoir is kind of her thing. And so when I gave her the manuscript that I thought was frankly pretty good, so I think at the stage that, you know, Samantha had given her, you had given your feedback to me, I gave that to her and she said, well, this has to go and that has to go. And, oh, there's this and that. Like one thing that was really hard for me to do, I think this was before actually you got it, was there was nothing from my 20th year till my 40th year. I had completely not written anything about my first marriage, my children. It was too hard. You know, my dad had died by the time I was wrapping this up. My children I adore, and their father I care about, and so writing about that was just the hardest thing, probably the hardest thing I did, aside from writing the scene when my father's molesting me. And so those chapters were new and needed, and you know, they were really tough for me. So then I think your question was also about kind of how has it been to get it out and publish it and stuff.
Yeah.
Fascinatingly, it's been, I mean, it's been really positive, all told, really positive. And the thing is that I was very stressed about it for 6 months. You know, you go through all this editing and write, and then copy editing, and then proofing, and it takes forever until it's finally in production. And during the whole time that it was in production, I was very stressed out and anxious. And I had no idea how it would do. I didn't know whether, I thought I'd covered all my tracks with pretty much everybody I had to cover with my tracks with, but I didn't know if somebody would come out of the woodwork or whatever. And I will say that as soon as it came out, as soon as publication day hit, that all went away. It was just like, it was sort of like, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit like when you know, your kids grow up to be in their 20s or after college or something, and they're sort of launched, and you kind of take a little bit of a moment. Not that you're not parenting them forever after that, but, or in some ways, you know, the relationship changes. But in any case, it was really a relief. I slept well, I felt better. So I've been blessed with a very positive experience so far with this book, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. I'm sure some other people have questions, more specific ones about that too.
Yeah.
Does that answer most of what you were?
Yeah, thank you. No, that it's great to just have a little bit of that context too. And yeah, I think the passages that you read were so sort of poignant and setting the tone of the book, because yeah, you do such a great job of describing place and people in that way.
Great. Thank you.
But yeah, we can definitely open.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to actually stop the recording.
Okay.
I'll stop the recording just so that folks don't feel, you know, self-conscious about asking other questions. So we'll stop that.